Good morning. My name is Wolfhardt Janu. I'm living in Austria, a small country in the heart of Europe, in its capital, Vienna. I would like to welcome you to my lecture, Eros and Thanatos, Measurable Vibrations in the Field of Consciousness, or more technical, how temporal synchronized order in two random data streams can make the field of consciousness visible. Why the title Eros and Thanatos? Eros, the ancient god of erotic love, and Thanatos, the ancient Greek god of death, are standing as a symbol for our current research focus. My own journey started in 2019 when I had the idea that during Tantra events where we would expect a strong presence of Eros, a strong subtle field might be able to order the data streams of two random number event generators. So I placed the laptop equipped with two random event generators, short REG, which I name in my presentation Alice and Bob, in the main room of a Tantra seminar in Germany. A random event generator generates white noise. It can be thought as an electronic coin flipping machine using a tunneling effect from quantum mechanics to produce zeros and ones. So in our case, we have two white noise sources which stand close together inside a room where people are celebrating Tantra rituals. The setup was later called the Oregano device, named by our research group Oregano. And since November 2019, a miniaturized version of the Oregano device is built into a practical box and is called Viroscope. But what would be expected from a perspective of the materialistic paradigm? If we plot the output, or to be more precise, the bit sum of Alice and Bob against time, it would be expected that both graphs stay inside the 95% parabola. And secondly, and this is even more important for our work, both data streams, so both graphs, must show totally uncorrelated data. Thus, if you want to challenge the materialistic paradigm and have in mind a field of consciousness which eventually can order random event generator data, we should look for a suitable place where we would expect strong subtle fields or strong fluctuations in the field of consciousness. So where to look? And I thought, firstly, that according to Freud, Eros and Thanatos represent the deepest human drives, Triebe in German, and so I expected that events associated with these drives are expected to cause the strongest vibrations possible in the consciousness field, and leaving, if we're lucky, significant traces. So my journey, as already told, started 2019 with Eros. And to give an impression of the mood during such Tantra seminars, I'm showing here the picture of the homepage of the German Institute Secret of Tantra, which I chose for my experiments. This institute integrates traditional Tantra with Neo-Tantra under the umbrella of Ken Wilber's integral theory. I chose this institute because they teach, on the one hand, Western techniques like dynamic meditation and shadow work, and on the other hand, also traditional tantric techniques and practices taken from Hindu Indian Tantra and Buddhist Tibetan Tantra, like meditations, mantra singing, and traditional tantric rituals. When I arrived at my first Tantra seminar, I expected to see maybe some correlated data in the minutes range. But what I found was far more exciting. Because I found these graphs. during the main ritual day of the seminar. So the main ritual took place on Saturday and was the absolute highlight for all the people taking part in the seminar. The upper graph represents the graph during the preparation for the ritual, whereas the lower graph, which was lasting for 3 hours, represents the graph taken during the main ritual. Already in the upper graph, which takes about 45 minutes, you can see that both random walks significantly leave the parabola on the same side. And in the lower graph, you can see that not only both random walks leave the parabola, but also have that turning point exactly after 90 minutes. It is important to note that the shape and height of the random walks depends on the segmentation. And these graphs were taken by manual segmentation. That means that during the seminar, when the Tantra teacher said the main ritual starts or the preparation work for the main ritual starts, I pressed the segmentation button inside the Celeron software. This will be important for my later explanations. But after my first euphoria about the data, I saw the real problem which was waiting for me. In the current slide, you see the 24-hour plot from Saturday, and somewhere in the data, the ritual and the preparation graphs are hidden. And the problem is, how can we determine if data are really the most significant over 24 hours? So one approach would be to do this manually. But as I said, the graphs depend on the segmentation. So I would have to try all possible segmentation, and this would be 1444 manually, and look if I can find similar graphs. So what to do? First of all, I realized that the manual approach would take ages and it's not applicable for these kinds of experiments. And after 2 years of symbiosis with my laptop, various approaches, setbacks, and numerous discussions and inputs from my two most important project partners, Annette Grathoff and my wife Barbara Janu, I came to a software solution. In these 2 years, I developed a software which searches for 3 patterns, which I call channels, in the random walks of the data streams by permutating through all possible starting points. That means permutating through all possible segments. And beside that, also determines the Poisson coefficient between the random numbers. The starting time of a pattern in the random walks is determined purely algorithmically, which is a significant progress in comparison to historical data which are progressed by only one RAG. But what are the patterns the software is looking for? So channel 1 and channel 2A look for the so-called correlated pattern. That means that both random walks leave the parabola at the same side. You can think of the coin flicking machines show significantly more often heads or tails at the same time. So that means that this channel is sensitive to synchronous shift in the mean value. And channel 1, channel 2 is looking for the anti-correlated pattern. That means the random walks are leaving their parabola on the opposite side. One can think of if Alice flips a 1, then Bob flips a 0. So this channel is sensitive to a synchronized opposite mean shift and a variance increase. The third pattern the algorithm is looking for, in the so-called channel 3 min, is representing the stick together pattern. That means that both coin flips show the same result significantly often, though a single series is not significant. So channel 3 min is sensitive to a synchronized variance suppression. And channel 5 is looking for the person correlation between the random numbers. The person correlation is not applicable to random walks because this would find spurious correlations. Overall, the software is looking for these 3 patterns, and for each data point, the starting point is determined, and one can scroll through the software and the raw data and look to the pattern which is found. But what does the software find if we process 24 hours of data taken on the Saturday of the main ritual? If we plot on the y-axis the odds against chance, so that means what is the probability that these data or these correlations were just found by chance, and the time on the x-axis, we find one main peak, and very close or quite close to the main peak around 4 p.m. we find a secondary peak. The dashed lines, and this is as important as the peak height, is the starting point or the segmentation which the software finds. The segmentation, and this is important to note, the software can find is only a property of the data. So we have a main peak around 6 p.m. with a starting point around 5 p.m. and then we have a secondary peak around 4 p.m. with a starting point approximately 45 minutes earlier. And now we look if the data story, and so this is the story, and I like this analogy of a story. So the data story is found by the software. This is the structure which is in the data and only in the data. And we ask a question, does this data story overlap with the story of the people, so with the experience of the people during the seminar? And as I said before, I wrote down some notes during a seminar in the Celeron software, and I only wrote down the 3 notes you see in the lower graph. So 1, 2, 3 are the 3 notes I had in the system. At point 1, I wrote down the practice. So the practice of the ritual is starting. This was actually what I showed you in the upper graph in 2 slides before. The second note I wrote down was, now the break begins. And the third note I wrote down is, now the ritual is starting. These 3 notes are marked in the graph with 1, 2, 3. So the important and intriguing point is that these stories are matching together. So the data and the seminar history align. If this is true, then actually we should be able to recover the data pattern we found during manual segmentation. You can see now popping up. And you can see that both patterns, the patterns found by the algorithm and the patterns which was found by manual segmentation, are practically the same. This means that the algorithm recovers the optical result of the main ritual. Thus, the data story and the qualitative people story have the same start times and highlights. And these are typical properties of a Jung-Pauli synchronicity. Of course, for a scientist, the question if results are irreproducible is one of the most important ones. So I did some further recordings at Tantra seminars, and actually 2 seminars later, I already got a very good reproduction of the findings I had during the first seminar. So the most significant structure in 24 hours of data was identified, with the start of the ritual detected and the endpoint approximately located. And the sigma score, or the p-score, that means the odds against chance, is even slightly above the ones I presented before. Of course, after these results, the question arose, which conditions are suitable for blank runs? And this question is everything else than trivial. But after some discussions with Barbara and Annetta, we chose that as a control condition, We selected average locations at typical times where people gather, such as hotels in small German towns where no special events took place. So I took approximately 1 hour of data using the same setup and analyzed with the same software. Of course, we also see events and peaks in these data. So as we didn't know the events, the cause is unknown. But the peak heights of these events were 2 to 3 orders of magnitudes lower than those observed at the Tantra seminars. After the first series of experiments, I wanted to dig deeper into the nature of the field of consciousness, which might be visible through the use of two REG data streams. So I had the big opportunity in 2022 to record a traditional Tantra ritual of very progressed Tantra practitioners. The ritual took about 7 hours and started at 3 p.m. and lasted until 9:50 p.m. And actually, if you look to the raw data plot of the random walks in the lowest graph, this is represented by the pattern I found. So in this plot, two patterns or anomalies are combined. We see the correlated pattern. That means both random walks leave the parabola together with the stick together anomaly. That means that both random walks stick together for a significantly long time. And even for a layperson on this graph, it's visible when the ritual ended. It ended at 9:50, where the two random walks start to get back to a normal area. Another intriguing question I wanted to investigate during this ritual was if the correlation between two REG plots is following in real time the story of the people. That means, can we see the mood, the emotion, and the structure of the ritual reflected in our plots? And at least for this ritual, the answer is a clear yes. You can see the plot of the ritual, actually what the people did during the ritual, and the REG data plots overlaid to it. So we can see that the formation of the protection circle is reflected by the starting point of channel 3. The peak maximum of channel 3 is reflected by the end of the protection circle Su ceremony. Then, and this is an interesting one, we see a baseline period. In this baseline period, actually people try to get rid of everyday thoughts and try to focus only on the ritual. And then this was followed by a Shiva mantra, and this was followed by a Shakti mantra. And the interesting point here is that the starting point of the Shiva mantra, which is in the baseline period, so this is reflected with the green dashed lines, was exactly when the man who performed the calling of Shiva and started to sing the Shiva mantra was doing his purification ceremony. And the same is true for the woman who did the Shakti mantra and the calling of Shakti, where the starting point is exactly when she did her purification ceremony. In the end of the starting block, you can see that also the dedication to the four elements is reflected very nicely by the random plots. One intriguing finding during this experiment was that we confirmed the assumption that there is something like a meaningful relation between a highly synchronous moment represented by a peak in this plot and its starting point, which in this case represented the purification ceremony of the man and woman who later called Shiva and Shakti. This was also true for the first series of experiments, where we have the meaningful relation between the starting point and the ritual. So, and this suggests that maybe we are on the surface to understand something like a Qualia field, a field of meaningful relations which is represented in a starting point synchronous anomaly in the correlation of two REG data streams. Looking deeper into the data, we found even more fascinating structures. If you remember from before, there was this Shiva and Shakti mantra. And if you understand ritualistic, then this could be interpreted like a ritual in a ritual. So this is actually the nucleus of a tantric ritual. So the calling of Shiva and Shakti is something like a short teaser for the whole ritual. And if you look into the data, and actually the starting point for this Shiva and Shakti ritual was also found by the algorithm, you see a clear self-similarity. So in the lower plot, you see the plot again from the whole ritual. And in the upper plot, you see the plot of Shiva and Shakti, of this calling of Shiva and Shakti. And like in the famous Mandelbrot fractal, we see the same patterns. So we see in both cases the stick together pattern combined with a correlated pattern. And at the end of the Shiva and Shakti mantra, both random walks go back to the normal area, as it is reflected also in the end of the whole ritual. One of the highlights of these recordings was the reproduction of my second recording I did in 2019. Actually, in 2019, the same traditional ritual was performed, but at this time with not so experienced people. So we can see clearly that the pattern was reproduced, and in both graphs you can see the endpoint of the ritual. As this was done on two different locations with different participants, so only the institute and the teachers were the same, this cannot be the result of the same location and same people. And one possible interpretation is that the repetition of a ritual structure, that means the qualitative people story, generates a sequence of similar qualia leading to a similar form of the qualia field, which in turn results in similar data structures in the REG data. So, Jung-Pauli synchronicities. So now we come to the second main focus of our research, Thanatos. We are investigating in an intensive care unit in Spain, in Elche, and in an hospice in the UK, the dying process. So we place our regional devices close to patients that are close to death. And here I think is a good time point to point out that everything what I'm presenting, everything what we're doing is the output, is the result of a great team, the original team. Our team is based on radical cooperation and includes scientists from many disciplines. So our three physicists, Vasilios Basios, Pier Francesco Moretti, and Jeff Dunn, are accompanied by a medical doctor, Vicente Ares, and of course, as a psychologist, Peter Felmig, I think you all know very well. The project in the ICU in Elche is led by the original Spanish branch. So the coordinator for statistical analysis and statistical methods in physics is physicist Javier Fermin Urrugia-Schölzel, accompanied by the software developer Enrique Monzo-Solves. The whole project is coordinated by Vicente Ares, and the doctor-in-chief is Dr. Francisco Javier Coves, who is doing the experiment in the intensive care unit. But what actually do we detect, or what do we want to detect? So I think everybody knows that around the moment of death, there are a lot of anecdotal stories about psi phenomena or non-local phenomena which are going on, like shapes leaving a body, clocks stand still, animals fly through a window, and so on, and so on, and so on. And we want to investigate if we see around the moment of death non-local traces in our random data. In the ICU, important events in relation to the dying patients are noted or written down by the hospital staff. In this case, they wrote down that a priest arrives, a consent signature of the family, the moment of death, and emotions around these moments. The patient remained in coma throughout the whole time period, yet our setup was able to detect all documented events. You can see here the 24-hour plot, and it's quite easy to see that we got all the events exactly with our device. From the hospice in the UK, we only get the moment of deaths of the people sent via email by the leading doctor. The result here presented is one of the most significant, actually the second most significant result of our hospice series. The peak, which is presented here, was the highest peak in 23 days. And on the maximum of the peak, exactly at this minute, the patient died. If we go down to the raw data, the random walks, we see a long-lasting, very beautiful stick-together pattern, which breaks exactly when the patient died. Because at that time, this was our most significant case when we saw the data, we called in the hospice and asked if there is anything special around this case, because we have a special high significance. And they answered that yes, actually, everybody remembers this patient. He came to the hospice with his dog, and his dog was with him in his room, and he chose to die fully conscious. And a few minutes, so 10 minutes before he died, the dog left his room. And this might be actually the smaller maximum on the peak, which tracks this moment when the dog left the room. Overall, it can be said that the data in the hospice are more significant than the data in the ICU, which would be expected as until now, all patients in the ICU were in coma, whereas the patients in the hospice are at least to a higher extent conscious. Now the presentation of the results is finished and we come to the frequently asked questions section. So these questions were the most common one people asked after they saw the same slides and data you saw before. So one interesting question, of course, is can we find traces of classical signals in the data? And the answer is no. We checked the data with several tools and methods and found only perfect white noise. Then a question which is related to that, do the highly significant peaks disappear when the temporal context of the random walks is destroyed, e.g. by shuffling the data? And the answer is yes. After shuffling, the significance levels are comparable to the blank runs in German hotels. And what means shuffling? Shuffling means that if you take the two data streams of 24-hour, for each data vector, we just take a small segment, like 1 minute of the data, and put it from the place where it is to a random place in these 24 hours. This we are repeating for all data, and so we break the temporal context. If you're doing this, we see that the data are perfectly random, and the peaks, especially high peaks, are disappearing. And another question, which is, I think, very interesting for people who are familiar with parapsychological research, is there a decline effect visible in the data? And the answer is not in the Tantra and hospice data, and maybe in the ICU data. But if in the ICU data, then the effect comes back quite quickly. Then are there also negative results in the presented series? Yes, we also have a few negative results in the hospice and ICU, but not in the Tantra series. And then a question which was quite often asked, especially from psychologists: can we measure a far distant event with the Wyrd scope? We think that in theory this is possible, but the coupling is not an easy task. We have two clear negative results monitoring remote events up to several days without having a significant hit. I think this is not only interesting for psychologists, but of course also to physicists, that why a non-local process couples to a local event. And because it's a non-local process, it should be possible to couple the Wyrd scope to any event we want to couple it. But in reality, this is not, as I said, not an easy task. And I think that for all measurements, it's much more easy to do them locally. And in the end, questions upon questions. And here are just a few. So, what factors link non-local measurements to local events? Is it really just a meaningful connection between experimental random number generators and events? Is there a relationship between different qualia and the strength or shape of the graphs? That would mean that repeating qualias cause repeating patterns in the graphs. And then, can a non-local feed via random processes, for example, thermal fluctuations, synchronize and structure local biological processes? Would this be a mechanism how consciousness can directly interact with our body? These are all questions we would love to address with our coming research projects. In the end, I would like to point out some current developments. So now actually the Wyrd scope synchropy detector and the analysis software package 1.0 is available at Wyrd Technologies. And especially I want to mention Michael Oswald, who is the programmer behind the Wyrd scope analysis software. So he brought my prototype, which I wrote in R, into a software which runs on Windows, Linux, and Mac. And all operations, all features like mouse zoom, like recalculating of intervals, reverse time plots, and so on, which were recommended by our scientific team, are now implemented into the software. And he brought down actually the analysis time from 15 minutes to 800 milliseconds, which is really a big jump forward. So thank you for your attention. And in the end, I would like to invite you to the Science and Consciousness in Broughton in the UK under the title Weird Space. It will take place in November 2025. And if you would like to dive deeper into this topic, weird space, then you are warmly welcome to join us.